some kind of podcast, I think. That means he must live around here.
Gross. I'm gonna puke.
Quit acting like a baby.
Welcome back to another episode, Spawnography. Folks, not our best intro, but
maybe our best intro.
I mean, the quotes in this one are interesting. We'll get into it, obviously.
There's some dialogue issues in this issue. This issue has issues.
Yeah, there's some lettering issues. There aren't really any art issues, but yeah, I'm one of your hosts, Pierce Lyden, here with
George Marston.
and
yeah.
if you've read Spawn number 58, you'll have a better understanding of why we are
kind of hemming and hawing around it.
Yeah, it's
a follow-up to one of the most controversial issues we've read so far, I'd say.
And there are controversies within this comic as well.
Yeah, there are. There's some slurs. There's some issues with lettering. We're not going to say the slurs. I'll say that right now. I'm not.
Speak for yourself. No, I'm kidding.
All right, sister. Take it back. But yeah, so before we get into it, did anything happen to you this week, Pierce? It's been unlike the last few episodes that we recorded kind of in a marathon. It's now kind of back to our regular recording day.
Yeah, once a week. No, I'm still gearing up for Berlin. It's 2 weeks from today, so
all right.
which is
that's great.
pretty cool. And yeah, I've just been trucking along. My girlfriend's kicking my ass in fantasy football today, so
wow.
There's that happening.
I've been playing the new Marvel vs. Capcom collection.
Oh yeah, me too. Once you mentioned it to me, I picked it up, and my brother came by, and his business partner came by this weekend, and I just left it on, on the title screen, and they're like, "What is this?" And I was like, "Oh, weirdly, I think Marvel Superheroes is my favorite."
I loved that game on PlayStation, and I loved playing it again. I played all the way through it. This time my guy was Juggernaut. I had a lot of fun. I've been trying to learn again to play Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which is a game of intricate timing and controls that I'm not so good at age 41.
I'm definitely way worse than I used to be, but I probably played like 2 hours total, and just that has brought back some of the muscle memory.
Right.
And it's fun. It's fun. My MVC2 team is usually Cyclops, either Gambit or Spider-Man, depending on how I'm feeling. And I've been actually I really like Doom. I just think Doom's great.
I mean, my favorite character, so I've been playing some Doom as well. My go-to team at the moment is Ken, Juggernaut, again, big boy. It's big boy season. And, kind of a rotating third cast member. Lately, it's been Gambit.
He's really fun.
Yeah.
And also, I keep just thinking of the Channing Tatum voice now every time I play him.
Every time. Well,
the other thing I really thought about was that I know that we got, 16-bit Spawn, and we spoke with the Play Comics podcast about Dreamcast Spawn.
Yeah.
Why didn't we just get like a Spawn fighter?
Spawn's in Mortal Kombat, whichever iteration.
MK11, yeah.
Yeah. And that's cool. But I was thinking the same thing. Spawn is built around one-on-one fights of Spawn taking on bigger and more dangerous enemies in his alley and other settings, it seems natural for a fighting game in the sense that you could honestly actually adapt Spawn pretty well through that medium. When you look at like Tremor, Overt Kill, even Violator, and now Cygor, just villains that he's fought in his alley. The Redeemer has come down. There's so many options.
Angela, Cagliostro, Curse.
Yeah. And Tiffany, maybe even.
Yeah.
And we're just, and Malbolgia, of course, we're just getting into like even the first chunk of Spawn here. I think they could skip the Billy Kincaid unlockable character.
Yeah. They could. Oh, Sam and Twitch, obviously.
Sam and Twitch would be a duo.
They like the ice climbers.
Yeah, right, exactly.
That'd be really fun. Yeah, I don't know why. I mean, we know that. I mean, there's that brawler, that like 3D brawler.
Yeah, there was, but it was
arcade brawler.
Very,
but that's not the same.
one note.
Yeah, I would have loved like sprites.
So,
like MVC2.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a huge fighting game fan and a huge retro fighting game fan. Always, Capcom more than Mortal Kombat, but there are some others in there, and I would just pop for that. I'd love that if I could somehow retroactively.
Somebody mod MVC2 and add Spawn.
So it's all Spawn characters.
It's a little crazy that there's not just a game called Image United that is
right
like that. If there was a 90s
Dragon.
Image like fighter, that would be sick. That'd be so sick. Well,
have like Spartan and Zealot. You should have all the Wildcats in there, honestly.
Yeah,
all the
heroes. Of course. It would be awesome.
It's enough room for all of them. Shadowhawk,
and then you'll get Supreme
Cyber
in there.
Force.
Glory.
Supreme, that'd be fun.
Prophet. Be cool.
Did that character ever generate any? No.
Probably no.
Some
but
good reviews at one point.
Yeah, which then were sort of marred by that creator, unfortunately. If you're hearing a little more resonance, deeper resonance to my voice, it's because I'm still like a little congested. So I don't normally sound this sexy. Or like I'm like you could call me on a 1-900 number.
To talk about Spawn. Hot spawns in your area. There's a little bit of that version of like 90s culture in here too.
That is absolutely true. So you know what? That's a decent transition. It's not our worst transition. So let me
not mine.
Let me dig into the credits before we get going. So this is Spawn number 58. Image Comics presents Orphans. Story by Todd McFarlane, pencils by Greg Capullo, inks by Todd McFarlane, Danny Meeke, and Chance Wolfe, copy editor and letters by Tom Warzakowski, colors by Brian Haberlin and Dan Kemp, dedicated to the memory of Sally Snyder, who I'm not totally sure who that is.
It could be someone that they know.
Yeah, I'm not.
Sure. I mean, I'm sure it's someone that they know. What am I saying? It could be someone that they know. Anyway,
this issue. So the cover also. There's a familiar face on the cover, not just Spawn. There's a little kid, and if you'll remember, back in Spawn number 29, Spawn was spawning across America. He came across Eddie and Andy and their shitty dad, who's a cop, and beat them.
Abusive dad who's a cop. Yep. Spawn flitted into their lives. They found him. Andy, I think it's Andy's the younger one.
Andy's the younger one, yeah.
Andy drags him home in his little red wagon with the help of Spawn's own chains because his necroplasm is so heavy. He's also full of bats now. We'll find out more about that. Spawn's just full of bats this point. So cool. And he, quote unquote, helps them with their dad. He promises them he'll be back and then he'll protect them from their abusive father. He finds their dad who's been drinking. basically uses his powers to make "I beat my kids" appear, the words "I beat my kids" appear all over his body.
Yeah, like he's a
He gets
chalkboard in The
home.
Simpsons.
Yeah, exactly. He gets home drunk, threatens his Andy, the younger one. Eddie gets his gun, his dad's gun, and in an act of horrifying violence, kills their dad. We'll find out here finally the aftermath of that and how Spawn's indifference and continued indifference will really fuck these kids up. And honestly, this is a kind of a depressing story in a couple of
Yeah, it's
places.
pretty sad.
More so, I mean, Spawn's always a little depressing. That's kind of his thing. But this in particular is just, there are a couple moments in this that are kind of heartbreaking. And it's meant to be, and it's meant to show, I think, again, we've brought it up several times now, the black heart of darkness that he has now, that
Right.
is his lack of emotion. And it's a bad time for Spawn to have to be dealing with the fallout of some bad stuff he did when he thought he was doing good way back when. Um, and he won't handle it well, as we'll see. Also, gonna say right off the top, a lot of this issue, rare Orzakowski L. There's a lot of typos, some bolded words that are typoed. There are some places where the word balloon placement is really incomprehensible.
Yeah, what makes me wonder if it was a bit of a rush job, but the thing about
It
Image books in general is just that like they kind of run on their own schedule. Spawn tends to not be all that late, considering we're in February of 1997, and we're almost 5 years into the book, and we are about 60 issues in. Like Spawn's not really late. So
No, it's
yeah,
not. But I think this is, maybe we're seeing some of why, seeing some of the paste that's holding together these dreams,
that's
because
true.
I will say, I did read a little ahead. We were initially going to cover 3 issues, and we kind of decided to cover it separately in a one piece and then a two piece, because the stories don't really line up. It's kind of just, there's some spiritual connective tissue, but we decided to dig into this one, and all all three of them, though, I will say, do feel like rush jobs.
Hmm. Yeah. I wonder if the bi-weekly, like the two a month, really just got to the teams. Because
Yeah,
Orzakowski's lettering everything at that point.
that's
Is
fair.
he lettering Curse of the Spawn also? Because Curse of the Spawn is coming out at the same time.
Mm.
That might be the other thing too, is he's on multiple. Well, he's Tom Orzakowski. He's a goddamn legend. So I'm sure he's not only lettering Spawn. Like he's got a
No,
slate of
but
books. So
it seems like Spawn's kind of not getting the same level of sort of forward attention, and maybe he is doing Curse of the Spawn as well at this point. That's the other thing I did this week, is I ordered a good chunk of Curse of the Spawn issues off of eBay. So we'll have that to look forward to coming up. But yeah, so we're gonna pick up with a little bit of a recap of what happened to Spawn. Um, these two kids in particular, they have been in foster care. Then they went into the system because they said Andy started a fire. After they went into a juvenile detention facility, basically Eddie, the older one, decided to break them both out. He noticed security was lax, and Andy kept talking about Spawn, so they made their way all the way across the country, hitchhiking, going across the rails, eating just meager food and water, all the way to New York City to find Spawn. And there's this opening page is pretty okay. I mean, the narration kind of goes, it catches us up. It's a little word heavy, but it's fine. We get to, there's a lot of kiss placement in these
yeah.
issues as well, because we talked about it, I think, in the last episode. This is when McFarlane Toys was doing the Kiss Psycho Circus action figures.
Yeah. And, that, again, McFarlane's impact on the adult toy collector market is pretty huge. So, and those Kiss
It
figures
is.
really early on are kind of an early foray into, do I have to make a comic about it? Can I just
Right.
make a
Well, they did
figure of
even
it?
do a Psycho Circus comic, I think, and then I think it sucked.
I know they've done a bunch of Kiss comics over the years, and
Oh
they
yeah, of course
usually
they
are bad.
did. Marvel and all that stuff with their blood and the ink and all that.
Kiss is crazy because I like some Kiss songs, but I would
Sure.
not call myself like a Kiss fan.
Wouldn't want to at this point. They're boomer juggalos.
But like, but Kiss must have fans
Yeah, for
because
sure.
they're like wildly popular. It's
Well, they
very
put on
weird.
a certain level of show, and people like those big concerts. My roommate went and saw them, and I think Poison and something like 20 years ago, in their original quote unquote
Probably
farewell
awesome.
tour.
Oh yeah, they do say
Yeah, he
goodbye
said
like
it
every
ruled.
2 years. Yeah, it was probably super fun.
Well, now they have the like CGI version of them that's gonna like
Play
ABBA
forever.
has done now, and it's great stuff. I guess they're gonna.
That's the only thing I'd see at the Sphere in
I was about
Las
to
Vegas.
say they're gonna put it on the Sphere.
Yeah, fuck yeah, sounds awesome.
Just the AI Kiss, great.
A friend of mine was at the Sphere this weekend.
Wow.
Because there was the UFC Noche event.
Oh,
and
okay.
Showed me photos. Like he posted a few photos. Straight up, the inside of the Sphere during UFC event looks like you're Doc Ock and you need to, create the power of the sun in the palm of your hand. Like the inside of that thing looks like Doc Ock's contraption at the end of Spider-Man 2. It's nuts. I'll send you photos later. But
that thing is such an environmentally destructive monstrosity.
Oh yeah,
it's like an elder god of environmental darkness, basically.
When there's post-apocalyptic stuff, and like it's like a broken down whatever, and you're like, that seems very impractical. Maybe we shouldn't have built that in the first place.
Yeah,
that's what the Sphere is. Like the Sphere is eventual like dilapidated architecture for like mutants to live in.
Yeah, exactly. Some fantastical future world. The reigning emperor of the mutant horde will live in the Sphere. But speaking of Las Vegas, these two kids are winding up in Times Square, which is not unlike Las Vegas as depicted here, full of lights and full of very enticing adult things. There's like something, it just says head. There's rude nude peep show, Cage, 7-Up. I mean, how depraved can you get? 7-Up. By 1997, Times Square was solidly in the Toys R Us era.
Yeah, 100%. There was a Disney store. Like,
yes.
But I like that this is the Times Square of Spawn. And also, we know it's not 1997 in Spawn. We know that it's
but nonetheless, it's still
the
like 1994 at this point.
Yeah, probably like 94. Because also Eddie and Andy haven't really aged all
but
that
this
much.
Is also like full on 1972, like porno punk band, like guys shooting heroin. And sure enough,
before wokeness ruined New York.
Right, exactly. Before Giuliani and his wokeness ruined New York, the woke Giuliani of New York. And there is something true about how this is described with these two kids. It says, at first they don't know what to do. The people, there are so many of them. And, it says all they have to do is find one single person, blah, blah, blah. New York City, the first sight of its depths has triggered a flood of emotions in every first-time visitor. Optimism, delight, apprehension, fear. It's these feelings. See, that far I agree with, because the first time I went to Times Square, I was in my early 20s, and I walked around the corner and saw it for the first time. I'd never seen anything like that, even where I've been before, and it was just like awe-inspiring in terms of like visually trying to process it, that it's real. But
it feels like
wasn't
made up
full of like XXX adult. It was like Tickets booth.
It's crazy because even when you see New York in movies, and like I've grown up here my entire life, like
yeah, of course,
it does have this like
so
magical.
You live through those hard Scrabble corner days.
Through the hard times, yeah.
Right.
But when I was a kid, my younger brother, where I live in Queens, like we don't really have skyscrapers or anything, it's pretty suburban. But like my youngest brother, I remember whenever we go into Manhattan, he would look, if he looked up and he realized the enormity of the buildings, he would start to have a panic attack because he was worried that they would fall on him. There is something, and I actually wish that the art, I wish the art took a little bit of a different angle to show them a little bit smaller within the hustle and bustle of Times Square, because it is, it's there is a line about like the man-made jungle. We don't really get the sense from the art of what the narration is saying totally. And I think it's because the art has a lot of work to do. And it has to sort of, I think Capullo has to try to keep things simple just so that there's a bunch of space for captions.
So they meet this guy Snake, who offers them a little bit of Coca-Cola, and since they're from the South, they can't resist it. So they are like, oh yeah, we'd love to have some Coke with you. He takes them to Pizza by the Slice. They sit down, and it looks like they're in his apartment, and he starts telling them that one of them needs a job. And basically Snake, who is kind of looks like God from hell, starts... We've talked about God from hell before, a true hellspawn on earth. He looks like there's a dirtbag punk like this in every city. This one happens to sell drugs, and he entices Eddie and Andy into a life of being drug mules. And at first it starts with handling a little bit of cash, then taking baggies from place to place, delivering packages. And soon, as we see on the very next page, in this kind of
insane illustration,
I was going to say kind of great
page,
but also like super unhinged, we see Andy looking a little upset as Eddie is now decked out like Eazy-E, like straight up with like, he looks like he's dressed like Eazy-E. He's wearing he's got holding a fucking Uzi, and there's like booze and drugs and a joint and a heroin syringe and like all these mad scientist supervillain looking punks that are all like, I guess, the drug gang that Eddie has become a mule for in order to protect Andy. And he starts doing drugs. He starts getting used to the money. And soon enough, he's very used to a life of crime.
How much is he getting paid just to move this stuff around? Because, like, are they hiring?
Right? I mean, but also, like, the thing is, it establishes at the front that they had no money and they weren't eating at all. And, like, they were barely getting by. They spent their last money on the bus tickets to New York. So any stack of money, $25 in 1997 felt like a lot if you had literally nothing. I don't think you were buying, but they're like, also, it seems like they're plying him with a lot of stuff. Like, they're seducing him into a life of crime. It is the mother of every teenager's nightmare. He's fallen in with the wrong crowd. This is the New York City of kids, 1997. You know what I mean? Like Sully is gonna walk around the corner or something in the Sully.
This is like Last Action Hero. New York, sort of.
It's like a fucking absolute drug torn mayhem, carnage torn New York City where Rat City can exist. It's the New York City that people who are afraid of cities still think exists today.
It does kind of make sense. Like, obviously Todd's not completely naive. He travels a lot, but like, he's from Canada and lives in Arizona. He does not
has
live
a certain point of view on New York that comes through in this.
Yeah. Which, Marvel's based there, and they had a falling out, so.
What was going on in the world outside Todd's window, man? Some dark shit. Anyway, yeah, so we catch up with Spawn, and Spawn is doing some weird surgery with his talons, as skilled as a surgeon's, manipulating intricate bionetics where he's taking out Cygor's tracking device, and Major Forsberg is like still freaking out. He's like, who are you doing this? Who are they? Why are you? Why am I? Who is this? Who are they? Why are you? How are they? And
yeah, I'm pretty over Forsberg already, I'll be honest. Although it is a little bit funny that he's kind of there just so Spawn has somebody to talk to, like so that there's somewhere to point dialogue, even though most of the dialogue at this point is shut the fuck up.
Well, this is incredibly insensitive for a lot of reasons. It's
Yeah.
It's like a stark raving lunatic comic book version of someone who's got a mental illness and trauma. And then Spawn, who is, of course, now possessed by the black heart of darkness, is like, would you shut up? I'm getting tired of your rantings. That's what we should have done. Would you shut up? I'm getting tired of your podcast.
That's what we should have done, but
too self-fulfilling. But yeah, he's calling him Captain Psycho, and he's like, I'm going to let these worms have their way with you. We find out later that Cygor is like being held in stasis by these worms that are filling his like body, letting him breathe only just enough. Spawn removes a tracking chip, which triggers a huge turn of events in Jason Wynn's like network of spider-webbed secret organizations.
So they've been tracking Cygor the whole time.
Apparently so.
If they were tracking him, how did they like lose track of him?
Well, I don't think they lost track of him.
Were they letting him go to New York? Was that the plan?
I think they were letting him go to Spawn. Like they were probably letting him go fight Spawn. Now, it would have actually been kind of interesting if that had been clearly established before. And maybe I think way back when we first got to Cygor, like 30 issues ago or something, or at this point, I think there was maybe a scene where they discovered he was gone and they were like, he's probably going to find Spawn or something. That might have happened.
I mean, we only just found out that he's Spawn's friend.
Yeah. So I think anything's on the table with Cygor at this point. We were praising Todd McFarlane earlier in earlier recent episodes for finding ways to draw on things he had already established, to expand on them. And in a way, he's doing that with these two kids coming to New York. I'm glad he's following up with that, sort of. In concept, I am.
Feels like their lives would have been better if he didn't.
Yeah, a little bit. It has
much
that
like
effect.
Spawn. Todd should not get involved in their lives.
No. So I'm not going to talk too far ahead, but the thing that this has in common with the next little two-parter that we'll cover is there's stuff going on with kids and the endangerment of kids. Not in like a comic book kind of way. Not like Billy Kincaid.
Right.
And it's connected in that way. And I think what we will be seeing then that we're not seeing now is that Spawn doesn't give a fuck about these kids. And you can blame, and we'll find out about that in a minute. You can blame the Black Heart of Darkness. You can blame whatever. But like, it's interesting how much Spawn cares about a child who's not even his because he should have been in his mind, versus these kids whose lives he interjected himself in. So before we get to that, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm just talking around this part that gets kind of confusing, where the network of like shell companies and organizations or whatever that's meant to shield Jason Wynn alerts him to the fact that Cygor's tracker is gone. He orders that the people who are meant to be keeping track of him are to be killed and cleansed
and like replaced
and replaced. And there it says they'll never be found. They're to be dumped under tons of refuse in a distant landfill. Now, something interesting in my copy of this that's just a stupid tiny thing. In the where it says under tons of refuse, in the under, the gap in the loop on the R is white.
Yes, yeah,
and that says to me that what was happening here was that the lettering was, what it seems like is the lettering was being done by hand, and then the coloring was digitally dropped in, and they forgot to fill that spot with.
Oh yeah, you're probably right.
Dropper tool, just kind of funny.
Yeah, it's like that in the print version too. It's
just a
funny the things
funny.
that get fixed and not fixed across the compendiums and stuff.
There's some typos in here that are bolded typos, which is a little worse in my mind because you're drawing attention to the typo. It's also just funny to see a tiny artifact of what was going on at the time, which was the early melding of those early techniques for coloring and digital coloring in the old manual lettering style. And I could be wrong, they could be digital letters as well. They could be digital letters, and there's another part of the process, and maybe that's not even what that is. But for some reason, it just stood out to me in a funny way.
The word that I'm certain that between Orzechowski and Todd McFarlane, they have no idea how it's spelled, is separating or separate.
Yes, because it's
constantly spelled wrong across many issues of Spawn. Welcome to the Spelling Issues in Comics podcast.
Yeah.
No, we're not going to do this all the time. We're only calling it out here because this is a rare Orzechowski like middling effort, and
that's going to get more pronounced in a couple of pages.
Yeah.
We got to check in with the Talking Heads. They're basically just taking everything that happened with Jason Wynn just now and reiterating it somehow in the language through which it gets to the news, which it seems like if all of this was meant to shield Jason Wynn and the CIA from culpability and susceptibility and detectability, it wouldn't be getting to the news, but these talking heads are becoming less and less comprehensible to me. Their viewpoints, it's kind of just 3 paragraphs running together of like what we're learning is that relations between the US and other countries are cooling, and the US is catching heat for operations in places it wasn't supposed to be.
Which is kind of the fallout of all that Korea, North and South Korea stuff that we saw in the last arc. So on one hand, it's like, all right, I mean, this is good. I noticed that E Entertainment News has been changed to infotainment television, which is true.
Gotta
I
be
guess.
Like a founding usage of that terminology.
And also, I guess at infotainment, as opposed to E, the first queer character canonically in Spawn had to shave his mustache.
No longer looking like John Waters, looking a little more like Steve Rogers. Downgrade, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, the mustache was cool. Bring it back.
But also, she's back on CNN now, I guess. So that's fine.
It's a legally distinct logo.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, this is the Cartoon News Network. So we catch up with Eddie and Andy, and here they are in Rat City. They're making their way through it. It's saying that other people would be terrified. Andy's smoking a cigarette, and he says he's packing his blade. What happened to your Uzi, kid?
Right.
These kids have become tough over a matter of a month, it says. And like, that's a long time when you're like 13, 15 or whatever, and you start doing drugs. Andy, through all of this, has been kept relatively innocent. As they're making their way through Rat City, they run into Cog, who's basically like, you don't want to go down there. He's not the person you know him to be.
Right.
And they're like, please, though, he's the only one who can help us. And he says, down there, another few blocks. Now, here's where the lettering and the art stop matching up to me. The tails here that are crossing from like one panel to another that are kind of out of order. Like, the panels here also, the layout is strange. This whole page, art-wise and lettering-wise, kind of a mess.
I wonder if the dialogue got changed late to fit the layout better, maybe.
And then the balloon placement was stuck. But it's just very odd. It makes it look like the kids are saying things that Cagliostro is saying. It makes the timing... It's not read like I'd expect a usual comic page to be read.
Yeah, 100%.
I will say, we haven't called it out yet, but Greg Capullo getting better at drawing these kids.
Oh, I was just going to say that. I was like, especially on the page previous where Andy is like hugging Eddie's arm.
Yeah.
It's, and it's really nicely rendered.
Yeah, he does a very good job with it compared to many times when we've seen kids that look like either small adults or like weird doll people. Kids are hard to render in a 90s comic style, and Greg Capullo's getting used to it, and he's doing a better job with these kids.
Yeah,
Long story
they don't
short
all look
is,
like Boss Baby.
no, they don't. Thank God. Greg Capullo, Cogliostro. I almost said Greg Capullo leads them to Spawn. Cogliostro. Do you think Greg Capullo is Cogliostro is Greg Capullo's self-insert here, where he's constantly saying to Todd in the page, like, you got to get these scripts going somewhere, Todd. Like,
if Todd is Al, which we know is true.
Yeah, 100%.
If Todd is Spawn and Spawn is Todd, then Cog is Greg and Greg is Cog. And
Grog and Spawn.
Malbolgia is Marvel.
That's worse than the Spawn Immunity. The Spawn Immunity almost works at this point.
The Spawn Immunity is now a thing that I embrace.
Yeah. The Spawn Immunity, aka the Spawn Community. But so we get our first big shot of Spawn on his throne this issue, and it's a pretty good drawing. Yeah,
it's cool.
Cog points the kids where to go. They follow the way. We see that Forsberg is making himself useful by putting new corpses and skulls and shit on the throne.
Pretty funny.
Al just kind of sits there. Spawn's just like fully like in his sulking mode at this point. This is like
Forsberg.
Spawn.
Is Forsberg like his Alfred now?
Oh, that's horrifying.
Kind of though.
With the way he treats him later. Finally, the kids show up. And they see Spawn, or they're looking for Spawn, and he appears behind them. And Andy is immediately like, Spawn, it's you. And Eddie is like, man, you had us scared there for a minute. I thought you were another of those freaky homeless dudes. What a bunch of losers. He is not a nice kid anymore. He says some mean shit here, and he says some really mean shit in a minute. They're trying to catch up, and Spawn is like, who are you? Which... holy fuck, man.
Come on.
You're Black Heart of Darkness, but you don't even remember these kids?
And that's the thing, though, is that we've talked about how like Spawn has this sort of amorphous characterization to fit whatever Todd sort of wants him to be or needs him to be in the context of the story. Sometimes he's kind of benevolent and sometimes he's really angry. He's always asking questions. That is true. He's never getting answers. But sometimes he has this like really cold streak to him. Sometimes he's actually like pretty warm. This era now, as opposed to 30 issues ago when he met these kids, it was a little bit more excusable when he met these kids for his characterization to waver, I think, because the book was still relatively new. We were only, 2 years into the book rather than 5. And here he's already learned so many lessons.
But he's also had his heart ripped out and all that shit. Yeah. And so like he's in a mean place right now. It's kind of mean of Todd McFarlane to have these kids do this right now.
That's true.
Spawn's but I think that's part of the point, is to show that like Spawn's getting meaner and angrier.
But even through that, yeah, no, you're right.
It's tough. And I mean, I'm being facetious when I say it's mean of Todd McFarlane, but like, I think that it is also a product of Spawn needing to be whoever he is at the moment, which him not remembering them, that's intense to me. But they remind him, and he says, so what'd you do? Run away from your father? And, I guess Eddie's the younger one and Andy's no, that's
Eddie's older.
A mess up here.
Yep.
It's but Eddie says Andy says Andy killed him. He made the hurting stop. But Eddie killed him.
Right.
Yeah. Long story short, that's another mess up here. Sorry, yeah, here's where we learn that Andy burned someone's house down by accident. But actually, that's Andy saying it. So Eddie burned someone's house down by accident.
I think the script...
this page they forgot.
Yeah, and the script doesn't remember who's who, so...
Long story short, Spawn's like, I don't give a fuck about you. You're not my problem, is what he says. And Eddie, the older one, is immediately like, problem? Are you crazy? We didn't ask you to drive our dad nuts. We were doing fine before you showed up, but you made me have to kill my dad. This is all your fault. Now our whole lives are screwed up. Forget it. Let's get out of here, Andy. And first off, correct. I mean, Eddie's absolutely right. And he's kind of brave enough to just tell Spawn to his face, like, you fucked up our lives. We're not here fucking with you. You fucked with us. You came into our house and created a situation where you drove our dad insane, and we had to kill him to stop him from beating us. Which their dad wasn't kind to them before at all.
No,
but
and it's one of these things where it's because Spawn did what he did, and maybe it's because he doesn't have kids, but he doesn't necessarily understand kid logic. Kid logic is always like the simplest, biggest thing. If it's the quickest way between like cause and effect, if this, then that. And it's always the biggest, most dramatic, like soap opera-y version of that. But in this case, you're right. Unlike basically every other character, because even Cagliostro doesn't really hold Al's feet to the fire about decisions that he makes. He basically just goes like, that seems bad. Maybe that'll come back to bite you in the ass, but whatever. Yeah. Eddie does sort of force Spawn's hand a little bit and is like, fuck you.
Yeah. But it leads to him saying, let's get the hell out of here. And Eddie's like, no, I want to stay with Spawn. Eddie starts to drag him, and Spawn says, leave him alone. So now you care.
Yeah.
And this little panel here where Eddie walks away and he says, fine, suit yourself. You want to live with some F-slur vampire, which, Jesus Christ. Go ahead. I'm always tired of babysitting you anyways. Which,
in a way,
first off,
I remember being 14. There were jerk boys in school
that word got thrown around a lot by really mean kids.
Yeah.
Didn't need it in this comic book. It's a little strange. I don't think we've gone there with that kind of language before. Like, there are times when we're calling women whores and things like that, which is also totally inappropriate.
Right.
But this is even in terms of like PG-13 versus R rating or something. That's not a Comics Code approved bubble. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But I think that it's the kind of, especially as this book wants to be edgier, and I think that there's a little bit of, we see it in the letters columns, right? Where people are like, how come he doesn't curse? How come this? Like, I'm seeing it now in a lot of like now that the movie is like a little bit more on track to maybe happen, I'm seeing it more in like, this is what Spawn needs to be. It's got to be R-rated. It's got to be this. It's got to be that. And it's like, well, this is what you can get away with in a PG-13 comic that isn't any different. And now, not that cursing's any different than what kids hear at school, but like, you could sneak this one in.
It's just strange that this is the one that they were like, we're throwing in an F slur, which no one was calling it the F slur in 1997 that I was aware of. I'll tell you that. You were just going to say the word and throw it out there. And if you don't know which word that is, then God bless you.
Did you? So when I was a kid, I grew up in a very religious family. So I did not curse for a really long time, which is funny if you have listened to this podcast, because I think I curse all the time. But did you ever do this as a kid before you started adding like curse words to your vocabulary, where you'd say them out loud to like see how they sound?
You'd be in the woods alone or something, or like on the back of the bus, and you'd be like,
whisper it to yourself.
Like, exactly. Like whispered into your hand. There was this kid on my bus when I was about 6 years old, going to first grade, maybe 7. I want to say his name was Blaze. Not spelled a cool way.
Blaise.
Something like that. Or maybe it was spelled cool. I can't remember. Who loved swearing, and he would sit behind the bus driver and just sing curse words. He'd just go like, shit, fuck, hell, ass, bitch, ass, damn. And there were times when I'd be like, hell ass damn fuck shit fuck damn, like going with him. Like, bus driver doesn't fucking care. This bus driver never turned around and said a single thing.
It's the spawn of bus drivers.
The spawn of bus drivers did not care what this kid was saying, or there was what nobody cared. Living in the South is very strange because everybody curses a lot, and then also everybody gets mad at cursing a lot, and it's probably similar up north. Honestly, it's probably just a thing about adults around kids.
Oh, all the like the parents of the kids that I coach are just like, well, whatever, they're going to hear it anyway.
Yeah. I mean, by the time I was a kid, like, my mom would get mad when I was a kid. I think I was probably like a teenager before I was like dropping a fucking curse word in front of my mom.
I can curse in front of my parents now at 35 years old, and it's pretty freeing, honestly.
Anyway, this panel is heartbreaking. This drawing of Andy going, Eddie, is heartbreaking, where he sees that Eddie has turned cold even to him. And I hate that, because I have 2 younger siblings, and especially when I was this age, and this is maybe slightly wider in age gap. I have a sibling that's 4 years younger than me, who I was always extremely protective of. And like, under no circumstance, if my sibling had been like, I'm not leaving, I would have been like, that I'm not leaving either. So it's like heartbreaking to me, and you see how far like Eddie has come.
Yeah, I have 2 younger brothers, and you know, I think we've had our ups and downs, but yeah, I'm the oldest, and so I always it didn't even matter, even if they were like wrong about something, I like had to have their back. Like, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't even a question, and it didn't matter who that was with, right? With if that was like our parents, if that was like random kids or their friends or whatever, it was always like, no, whatever you said is right, and like, I'll yell at you later about the fact that you put me in a position where I had to be on the side of your lie, but like, I'm not going to abandon you in an alley.
Yeah, exactly. And again, being oldest siblings, both of us, to 2 younger siblings, just there's no way I would have ever like abandoned. And so like, I understand that's not the point. Isn't a sibling would never do that. The point is, Eddie has now come so far in his cold-heartedness through all he's been through, that he's now willing to do that, and it's sad.
Yeah, this, like you said at the top, like, this is a pretty depressing issue.
And to Greg Capullo's credit, the rendering of that panel is just superb. Like, Eddie's face, his eyes, or Andy's face and his eyes and everything, and Orzechowski W on like the lettering with Eddie and like where he's saying Eddie, the spawn. It's all great. Sad as fuck. And of course, that's also the one panel that has the worst word in this whole comic. You know, and you know, if you're listening and that's a word you've decided to take back for yourself and
that's fine,
that you've applied to your life, that's fine. It's just not one that I am doing that with on this podcast at this time about this comic.
So Eddie leaves. He heads back to see Snake, and he
who's smoking out of a kazoo.
Yeah.
He's smoking incense out of a kazoo.
I don't know.
I'm
not
what,
sure what's
I'm
going on.
I'm going to go ahead
there.
and say, I don't know what drugs they're meant to be doing, but like, either this shit was totally different in the 90s. I guess it was different in the 90s. I don't know. Maybe they're doing meth, and I'm.
That was my initial thought, is that it was meth, and then I was like, no, that doesn't seem right. It seems like a really stupid pipe.
He's got tongs, and it's holding cotton.
Yeah,
or I think, or maybe it's something that she's. Oh, you know what it is?
Or is that just a flame?
No, they're freebasing.
Oh.
It's just rendered like she's holding a kazoo. The way I said that, like, I'm like, oh, of course they're freebasing. But freebasing is when you burn something, usually crack cocaine, and it burns freely in the open air, and then you inhale that smoke. is what that generally is. And so he's holding
Probably
crack
shouldn't do that around a
in
kid.
his tongs. Well, that's the point, is that they're
I know.
smoking crack in front of this kid. It's just also funny that like it's rendered like a fucking, it does look like a kazoo.
Yeah, and we find out that Eddie has missed a drop off or a pickup, and that Snake sent him on. And he was like, "Whatever, I was out, like I was doing stuff, like don't worry about it." And he's like, "Yo, like if I tell you to do something, you have to do it because I told you to do it, so it's important."
Right.
Obviously, Snake has never had a child, just and forgets what it's like to be a teenager who just does whatever they want. This leads to an opportunity where Snake realizes, like, well, Spawn is somebody that we want to track down, and this kid just said he left his brother with Spawn. He's probably not lying because they were pretty inseparable before. So let's, like, he can lead us to Spawn, and we can get another one of our jobs done, essentially. And that's
Right.
what
We
they
can
do.
take out Spawn, and he says that you know their delivery people. First, he tricks Eddie by telling him that Spawn's one of their customers, but since he
Right.
moved, they haven't been able to find him. So if he can deliver a package for them, that'd be great. And Eddie's like, yeah, sure, whatever. I don't give a fuck. Because Eddie is full on, like, he's been fully Corey Feldmanized at this point.
True.
Like his childhood has been shattered. And they're like, okay, but the real deal is Spawn's been taking out our dealers, because basically Spawn, these corpses that are filling up his corpse pile are coming from like killing, you know, drug dealers and pushers and like street sex workers and things like that. The low level criminals, because he's just stopped caring. Essentially, as we recall, Malbolgia kind of told him, if you get back to doing your job and sending souls to hell, I won't have to go get the souls of Wanda and Cyan and Terry.
Right. So he's doing really his job that he's supposed to have been doing all along, but
right. But it's also, he's doing it against, like, not against Spawn level threats. He's just like, you know, the guys that the Punisher shoots because he's bored? Like, those are the people that Spawn is now like eating with his cape and turning into maggot food.
yeah.
And Snake, who has 666 tattooed on his forehead and the same color hair as me, excuse me, takes his goons into the alley following Eddie. Eddie gets to where Spawn usually is, and he sees that Forsberg is there, just sitting in filth as usual. And Eddie says, "I'm looking for my brother. Where is he?" And that's when Snake jumps out with a gun and says, "Show me where Spawn is, or I'm gonna fucking paint that wall with your brains."
Obviously,
this whole
Spawn,
thing happens fast.
Yeah, Spawn gets the jump on them. That scares Snake. Snake shoots his gun. It hits Andy.
Yeah, Andy jumps out of nowhere, jumps in front of Eddie, takes the bullet.
And Eddie ends up like elbowing Snake. We get a panel of some bones.
Yeah, into the spines coming off of Spawn's bone throne, and impales him.
That's
and
cool.
He's dead. Yeah.
And so Eddie essentially does kill Snake.
Is that cool? Anyway,
Bone Throne? Bone Throne's pretty cool.
It sounds like something the worst guy in the office would say.
The worst cool guy.
The coolest worst guy.
There you go.
So
we got there.
Basically, you know, Spawn says, "I'm so sorry, but he's going to need a doctor. I know people who can help." The funny part is Spawn could just go like, doing, and heal his arm, but he's not going to do that. He doesn't actually care about these kids at all. Yeah. Doesn't give a fuck. That said, there is a clinic in this area that helps a night the vagrants
situation. Yeah.
Right. And she helps the kids.
And they're fine.
Andy's arm gets bandaged up, and they decide to go back home to Alabama.
They're turning themselves in.
Yes, really what they're returning to their foster care situation. They've seen some shit though, and it says, you know, Though no one mentions it aloud, they all sense that Andy and Eddie have changed, become more distant. They see it in their eyes. And since the two boys have taken a vow of silence, the others can do little but wonder. What baffles the counselors even further is how a couple of decent small town kids could change in such a short time into cold, emotionless individuals with the capacity for murder, and what could have stripped them of their innocence at such a young age. And it's like, well, while they're showing that, we get the exact show. We know exactly what it was. It starts on the close up of that 666 tattoo on Snake's head. Then the next panel is an almost Joker like looking image of Snake with maggots crawling in and out of his face. And then we see that Spawn has just left him where he is, cradled in his arm as part of the throne now. Now, I actually like the symbolism of this page in that it shows like there was this guy Snake victimized these children and got them to traffic drugs for him, and that led them into this violent situation. But ultimately, Spawn is the one who is holding all the cards and who got involved in their life in the first place. I think it's a powerful page to end things on, relatively compared to the rest of the story, because it shows the real consequence to Eddie and Andy and how desperately dark their lives have become because Spawn decided to fuck with them and their dad without thinking twice.
It also draws a parallel between the darkness of Spawn and the darkness of like the world itself. While Al earlier in the series was insistent that he's human, insistent that this was all a mistake, he's really come into his role as this like general in Malbolgia's army, even though he still hates Malbolgia, but like he's doing the work, as it were.
Again, Malbolgia has found another way to weaponize his love for Wanda and her family against him by basically using that as leverage to get him to be the general that Malbolgia wants. And Al is justifying that to himself by saying like, well, now is how I'm using my love of Wanda as my strength now. Instead of holding me back from what I'm doing, it's my strength in what I do, and it's how I have to do this.
Yeah, it's the way that he'll continue to protect Wanda and Terry is by, he's going to murder people and build a bone throne. So,
that's right. He's going to build the bone throne.
Yeah.
And he's going to have no compunction about sitting on top of fresh bodies and stuff. And it's a pretty bleak ending for these poor kids. I know it's not the last time we'll see them.
We'll see them again. Yeah, we'll see them.
But where it leaves them is once again just like downtrodden and destroyed. And once again, the same thing has happened.
Spawn has put them in a position that they are not.
Where Eddie's gotten hurt, or Andy's gotten hurt, and Eddie has had to kill to save his brother again.
Yeah.
He's now killed 2 people. And of course,
this one, I don't know if I count this one as a kill.
Heartless.
I don't know if I count this one as a kill because it's an accident.
What?
I don't think he meant to shove him into the thing. I think he meant to hit him. No, but he still
that's manslaughter.
All
so
right.
you still kill somebody when it's
because like they say,
I don't know. He didn't go into it like he did with his dad, where he was like, "I gotta kill this guy."
Yeah,
but like that's even worse. That it's still. I'm drawing a parallel between the two events, saying that twice now he's been forced to kill for Andy.
True, and
it shattered. When a child has to go through something like that, that's shattering.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That has the effect that they're deeply traumatized, and that's one thing that Spawn as a title and as a comic, and also as a character is not good at, is actually dealing with trauma. And now I will say most of this issue, some of the like very stereotypical depictions of New York aside, I'll give them credit for not having every like drug dealer be like a black guy, like like a caricature of like a 90s like hip hop guy or something, which would be very easy to do at this time. And is absolutely the narrative the media was selling, was a stereotypical vision of black people in urban centers as violent and uncouth. So I'm glad they didn't at least lean into that. nonetheless, it's dark and it's hard and it's tough and it's kind of showing that there's no real resolution to this violence when Spawn's around. It's just a cycle.
It's also what I think separates Spawn from a lot of comics, especially comics at the time. Big two comics are not really going this dark at all. But even when they do go dark, there's sort of like a light at the end of the tunnel.
Right. Eddie and Andy would have been like, Captain America would have found them, or even Punisher would have taken them somewhere nice.
Or Punisher would have been like, this is why I do what I do, and the guns are not for you, or whatever. He would have had like a lesson to tell them. But like,
actually, if it was the end of the Dolph Lundgren Punisher movie, he would kill the kid's dad in front of them, and then go to the kids and look like, I had to kill your dad because he was a bad man. Don't you ever do anything bad or I'll be back and I'll kill you too. Which is how that movie ends. It's cold as fuck. That is the best Punisher movie. It's not even a joke. That movie fucking whips.
It's true. It's weird because I do think that this kind of darkness and bleakness is what, from what I can gather, people really like about Spawn, is that it's maybe more the world outside your window than Marvel comics are. But even though obviously this New York doesn't exist, this situation doesn't exist, like, I guess it kind of does. It sort of does. There's layers of it that do exist. There's versions of it that do exist. And so, like, I don't know, because I don't interact with this book as more than I don't interact with this book as like, I interact with it as a superhero comic.
Right.
And not as something deeper than that. And when it tries to be deeper, or people are trying to glean something deeper from it, that's when I disconnect, and I'm like, I don't think you're understanding what this is supposed to be.
I don't always, we've talked, this is kind of the whole conversation of our podcast, isn't it? Is like, is it that deep, fam? And, when we look at these things and we look at Spawn and the issues and the stereotypes and the way it conveys certain ideas, I think it's obvious that Todd McFarlane this isn't fucking Doonesbury. You know what I mean? Where he's sitting down
no,
with
it's Family Circus.
Exactly. Well, oh God.
It's Marmaduke.
It's not. Yeah, it's Marmaduke. It's Dark Marmaduke, the new reboot that's coming, I'm sure. No, it's not meant to be like political commentary. It's not meant. This is not a political comic,
right?
In the sense that it's not meant to be like Todd McFarlane going, I'm going to put out a treatise about my beliefs on a deeper aspect of humanity, other than things like family and loyalty and what it means to test and lose those things. Those are the deeper things that I think Todd McFarlane is digging at. And I think oftentimes he uses stereotypes and storytelling cliches, especially 90s ones. I mean, that's 90s comics in a nutshell, is putting these comic book stereotypes and cliches and cultural stereotypes and cliches through their paces in a style that's like a supercharged hot rod compared to the like get around cars of like the 60s and 70s. You know what I mean? Like 90s comics in a nutshell are reckoning with those stereotypes.
I do think that the 90s as a decade is like turning the volume up on the TV to like 100 constantly. In all aspects. Like, a lot of media was this way. Look at toy commercials from the time where it's like,
oh yeah,
like check out the Tantrum, the all new RC control. Like, and you're just like,
yeah, well, every candy was
yelling
like
at me.
Extreme nuclear warheads.
Yeah, and it's even evident in Image Comics output, right? Like, that's what I mean. That's the joke about Rob Liefeld, but also his studio is called Extreme Studios. Everything's extreme. The muscles are gigantic. The guns are even bigger. Like, the boobs are even bigger. Like, even Vanessa was watching Eek the Cat earlier. Have you ever watched Eek
Hell
the
yeah,
Cat?
I know Eek the Cat. Absolutely.
She goes, this show is just 30 minutes of screaming.
Yeah,
And I was like, yeah,
absolutely.
that's what the 90s were. It's just
Yeah. Shit
30
was just
just
cranked up.
screaming 30 minutes at a time.
Well, not to bring everything back always to Reaganomics, but they fucking rolled back a lot of regulations about what you could advertise to kids on television and how you could do it. They ramped up shit like you can't have Joe Camel, okay, because kids like Joe Camel. I don't know. I didn't love Joe Camel. My mom was a smoker in the 90s, and I kind of hated cigarettes at the time. I'm still not a smoker or anything, and my mom quit many decades ago at this point. She's doing great. But I didn't. Anyway, they were focusing on stuff like that while they were also, like you said, just turning up the volume on everything. And 90s comics are very much the same way. It's the late 80s was a very deconstructive period of comics, right? Where we had The Dark Knight Returns and we had Watchmen and we had all these, other seminal works that are piled into that category of like the first wave of, superhero comics for grown-ups, really.
Yeah.
That drove the speculation, the start of the speculation boom, all that stuff. In the 90s was comics for kids reacting to that. And they couldn't do all the stuff like the cerebral, deconstructive, thinking person's comics. So they just took all the ramped up violence and the bigger pouches and the more extreme titles and the number ones, and it was a weird reconstruction of comics based on that deconstruction. And now we're getting into really deep shit that, like, anyway, but that's what this issue of Spawn exemplifies in so many ways. Is superhero comics are often moralizing, right?
Right.
Like that's
which is what's comforting about them usually is that you can show something very dark, but by the end of it, there's some sort of lighter resolution. Some
comics
hope.
Like Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns, to a lesser extent, that one ends on a bit of a higher note. But there were a lot of comics going on at the time that were saying like, no, this ends in insanity. This ends with Batman snapping the Joker's neck. This ends with Barbara Gordon getting shot. This ends with, a moment that is less comforting and more disconcerting. Like the end of The Killing Joke, for example, is not Barbara Gordon getting shot. It is Batman taking down the Joker and the Joker telling a stupid joke and then both laughing at it. And what that means has been debated so much. But like, these issues of Spawn are a reaction to those comics.
Yeah, 100%.
You know what I mean?
100%.
This New York is the Gotham City of Dark Knight Returns, where there's mutants selling drugs on the corner. You know what I mean? This guy, Snake, even kind of looks like one of those Dark Knight Returns mutants a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that reconstruction of those comics. It's that weird integration of trying to have those adult themes in a kid's comic. Ultimately, what is, in Todd McFarlane's mind, a kid to teens comic? Like that F slur on the page, exactly what you were saying. Trying to throw in something a little edgier, a little more, adult, quote unquote, and winding up with that.
Yeah. Yeah, rather than just saying fuck or something, right? Like it's
or shit or anything,
which we've seen weirdly not get used in the past. But yeah, right. It is. I think it is. We're seeing not just Todd's evolution as a creator, but we're also seeing his evolution as like a businessman and a salesman, where he knows that this is coming out before the movie comes out. He knows that the comics that come out the closest to the movie are going to be the ones that people are able to get their hands on. He's got to show a version of Spawn to audiences that lines up with what that movie is going to be.
Also, God, there's that kid in that Spawn movie too that like didn't even think about that until right now. Like the connection that there's Miko Hughes, I think is that actor's name, who is like the kid in every 90s movie.
But I do think that there's a little bit of like, oh yeah, I should probably draw a through line to this, the biggest thing I've ever done.
Which, God, that they put the kid in the movie to draw kids into the movie, to have the kids have a self-insert, especially little white kids, have a self-insert into this film. Imagine Spawn having a kid sidekick drawing you into Spawn. Robin, all the way back to Robin, right? And then you pick up this issue, the Spawn meets the kids issue, and this is what you get. And you're like, Spawn hates kids.
Yeah, he absolutely does. The only one he seemingly likes, as we touched on, is Cyan.
And even her, he's kind of weird about.
Yeah.
Because she should have been his kid, is his feeling. And we'll get some more of that preview of what's coming up. We'll get some more of that heat between Terry and Spawn, and it gets to some weird places. But Al's not in a great place right now. And it seems that it's always when he's really down and confused, and if not confused here, he's certainly given up a little bit. He's in the worst doldrums of depression and harmful behavior. That's when he seems to always run into these poor kids. So I'm terrified of what's coming next for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's it for the issue, but we have some back matter. The first thing is in the blah, 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 we get a photo of the Spawn hockey team.
Hell yeah, that rules.
In their very cool jerseys. The jerseys look one of those sick.
I saw one of those jerseys on eBay for like $400.
I'm so close to buying one. You have no idea. They're so cool.
So cool. We just said that in exact unison. They are so cool.
So the blah, 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 Terry Fitzgerald has some stuff. First, the Spawn hockey team. He says if they can't outscore the other team, which they usually do, they can intimidate the other team into forfeiting the game.
We'll send you to hell.
Yeah.
Have they done hockey Spawn? Have they just done Spawn as a hockey guy?
There's a card. There's a hockey card of hockey Spawn.
I would buy fucking goalie Spawn so fast.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Like goalie mask with the Spawn paint.
Oh, that'd be sick. We have to find like an NHL goalie or even a minor leagues goalie that like loves Spawn and be like, come on, do it. Bet you won't.
Yeah.
So Terry Fitzgerald says, so what has been happening since last month? Have you been out to see any movies lately? I know everyone has been to Star Wars, which I correctly predicted would make over 30 million first weekend. Sorry you lost the bet, Todd. So this was 1997, a great year if you were, like me, 8 years old.
I was a little older.
Or 9 years old because they did the re-releases 14. Of the original trilogy.
I remember it very well.
It was one a month. So each month you got to watch a new Star Wars or an old Star Wars, but on a screen for the first time, which you never got to see.
It was the remastered versions for the first time as well. I remember it very well.
Yeah, for the 20th anniversary, which feels crazy to say that Star Wars was only 20 years old because now Star Wars is almost 50 years old. And
that's what spurred on the prequels because they did so well and they were so successful that George Lucas said, well, I'll make another set of Star Wars movies the way I always wanted to. Badly.
The first one's good. New line.
I will say this. I'm going to derail us 1 second. When we went to our buddy David Peppa, shout out his wedding in LA, when my girlfriend and I got in, we caught an Uber over to where we were all meeting. And our Uber driver got so excited talking about Star Wars. First off, he asked us what our favorite movies were. And then he was like, but you know what the greatest story ever told is? And I thought he was going to say Jesus because I'm from the South. And so that would have been right on brand. But then he said Star Wars. And he got so excited talking about Star Wars and about how much he loves Star Wars. And Star Wars Episode 3 in particular, his favorite, that while we were stopped at a red light, he turned his phone sideways on the dock thing and looked it up on YouTube and sat there and watched the end fight of Star Wars Episode 3 and was like, you were the chosen one. And he was like so into it. I wish I could feel that kind of passion about anything again.
Your Uber driver was Hayden Christensen, so that does make a lot of sense.
I hope not. That would have been a very strange move for Hayden Christensen to be looking the way this gentleman was. He did not look like Hayden Christensen.
So
maybe it was. Maybe it was his voice.
There you go.
Coming through.
So New Line has started distributing the first Spawn movie poster, and Terry Fitzgerald says this advanced poster will be very rare and collectible in the coming years. So make sure you land.
Okay.
Make sure you land up. It should be end up getting one, no matter what you have to do legally, of course. Todd and I were in LA last week meeting with the New Line marketing people. They showed us a teaser trailer for the movie, which will start running in theaters within 2 to 3 weeks. By the way, word is Warner Brothers released the Batman and Robin trailer 3 weeks early to try to compete with us.
Now that's a shitty movie.
That movie's worse than Spawn.
Yeah.
That movie is better than Batman Forever.
I don't know.
Batman
Here's
Forever
the thing.
in a while.
I have watched them both actually quite recently, within the last 2 years.
I can get
Batman
through
Forever.
Batman and Robin. Batman and Forever is rough.
The thing about Batman and Robin, though, is that 40 minutes of that movie is just the Batmobile driving across the screen at Aang. It's a hard watch. It's a tough watch, and I love Alicia Silverstone, even though she endorsed RFK. I don't like her now.
Yeah,
back in the day, but nonetheless, it was a tough one.
Last thing concerning the movie this month, there are several employees of the M comic book company going around bad mouthing the Spawn movie, saying our budget was only $13 million. Blah blah blah.
Malibu did that.
Yeah, right. Let me for the last time set the record straight. The movie came in under budget at just shy of $40 million. Of that $40 million, $13 million alone was for ILM for the special effects. So
yeah,
it should have probably spent a little bit more. We fucked up the lettering again. Page.
Oops.
From issue 57. It says the corrected page has 2 extra word boxes that somehow missed the printed version. So here, this answers a little question we had earlier. Somewhere between the letterer's computer, the colorist's computer, and the filmmaker's computer, these 2 little boxes vanished into the ones and zeros of computer ether we call space. So anyway, yeah, this is the fixed one.
Weird.
I don't have 57 in front of me, so I forget what is actually missing.
Well, I have
probably fixed in the compendium.
Yeah, I was going to say it's probably fixed in here. But again, though, that kind of speaks to the like ramshackle nature feeling that some of these issues are starting to have.
Yeah. The letters 57. Column, the spawning ground has one. It has a little dedication to Morley Kolomijic, who passed after a year and a half battling cancer. R.I.P. And Todd is basically saying, like, you might have noticed that there's been a lot of inkers lately. That's why, because I've been dealing with this. So sorry about that. Right. And the letters columns, the letters themselves, there's a lot of like toy stuff. It feels like that's what a lot of people are writing in about, because they're arguing that like they're easy to break. And Todd's just like, yeah, you can break and disfigure any part of toys. You give a knife to an adult and tell them to have at it. So
yeah,
there's that. One fan has some questions. Any chance of the cartoon being on TV screens in the UK? Now here's something that's bugging me. Cygor, he's been hanging around for ages. He's in the toy line, but he still hasn't done anything. When will a damn ape meet the damned eternally that is Spawn? And any chance of a Spawn versus Marvel one-shot? I know you're too busy, but Batman was good and you drew Spider-Man well, so, whatever.
Right.
This was sent in before the last arc, so This madcap British fan who loves Sam and Twitch, age 15, just has not read that yet. Todd says, thanks for your long letter, James. I've always made it clear in letters columns that I control, that I don't believe in editing down what a fan writes in about. As a former letter hack myself, it was always with mixed emotions when I had one of my letters printed, but saw that 80% of the content had been dropped. For the most part, I don't correct grammar. So that letter, he was saying earlier, like, why did you print this letter this way? It's so weird. And he's saying I didn't edit it. If you read the last issue before this column, you'll see that you got your Cygor fix. And eventually I tend to get around to all, to all characters, but by only doing the one book that deals with Al Simmons' world, it becomes a bit of a slow process, and that he doesn't know anything about TV. No Spawn Marvel crossovers right now, as I feel there's an overabundance of crossovers at this time, even a glut, if you would. Anyway, I've never been much interested in doing what everyone else does. You'll probably see my crossover if I ever do one when everyone else isn't doing them.
Makes sense because they were coming right off of Marvel versus DC at this point. I think they were already on to like their second one, or maybe even the third by 97.
Yeah. And the next letter has some questions about like Spawn Blood Feud and stuff. Mostly just saying like that shit is cool. That's what I really like, the letters that are just like, this shit slams. I'm like, all right, glad it was working for you in 1997. That's how we often feel. I think when we get into an issue and then we read letters about previous books that are like, those were good, it almost makes the thing we're covering seem a little bit worse. But this fan asks, what are the names of the 5 Fleabag brothers? Was your work in any way influenced by The Crow? Any chance we'll see a cog figure? What kind of music do you listen to? Being a 13-year-old boy, these things are important to me. He says, off the top of my
figure, no, because he'd probably owe some money to Neil Gaiman.
Off the top of my head, I can't come up with the 5 names of the Fleabag brothers, but if you have a copy of the Violator miniseries that came out a few years ago, the answers might be in there.
Can either of us do it?
Oh. Well, if one of us does it, then the other can't. So do you think you can do it? I think I can get 3.
Violator, Vandalizer, Vindicator, Vacillator, and Vaporizer.
Nailed it. That's correct. I would have not gotten Vaporizer or Vacillator.
Vacillator is my favorite, or is he? You see, because I'm vacillating.
The Crow movie or book really never played a part in Spawn's existence, though there are some similarities that come from coincidence more than anything else. I think the only cog figure we have in the works is one based upon him and his appearance in the movie, where he has a cool outfit on that would make sense to generate a toy. I don't have any particular style of music that I listen to, though for the most part I like the kind of music where you can talk and listen at the same time.
My favorite album is movie soundtracks.
If you are trying to get whether I'm as weird as some of the stories I write, the answer is no. I'm fairly normal after hours, to the point of being disappointing to those who back me up the strongest. I just do these weird, dark, twisted stories because I think they're cool, not because I live my life that way. Well, yeah, we could tell.
I got the opposite impression from his introductions in the Spawn animated series. He seems like he's out there, he's pretty weird.
Twisted.
It's twisted and dark. I bet there's some weird shit that goes on. Okay. When you were a kid, did you ever have friends who had like parents who not swear words, but had like words the kids weren't allowed to say? Like, I knew these kids who weren't allowed to say the word fart. They were only allowed to say like toot or something like that. It was very strange. But I feel like for some reason, maybe Todd McFarlane's house had rules like that. Like you can't say vacillator.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It's, yeah, I agree.
I don't know. I'm just making a stupid joke there, but you know what I'm saying.
Oh,
it's the emphatic truth.
Yeah. The other thing is, by the time you listen to this, it will be old news, but we haven't talked about it on mic. That stupid fucking clip of Todd going around about boys not liking girl toys.
Oh my God. Honestly,
I don't really
that's
want
the
to get
most
into it for too long.
it's the most 90s brained like comics podcast shit of Todd saying that boys don't want girl or toys, and it's just silly. It's just silly, and if you've heard it, then you know that it's a ridiculous thing to say. And
It's just an
I
old
don't
man saying a dumb thing that he thinks he's saying like as a joke, and he doesn't actually mean that if you give boys toys that are girl characters, they will become serial killers. And if that is what you took away
no.
from that clip, oh boy.
It's tough. I didn't like the clip. I thought it was a stupid thing
Oh,
to
I don't
say.
like it.
Pierce and I discussed it, and I was like, this is really, this is bad. And it is. It's not great. But here's the other thing. This is not the dissect everything that Todd McFarlane has ever said podcast. And it's certainly not the like condemn or condone all of Todd McFarlane's weird shit podcast. So Todd McFarlane does have some weird shit going on, and he says weird things sometimes, as we've just talked about. But I don't know that that's not retroactively coloring my opinion of Spawn, other than the fact that, as we've noted, there are not many women in the cast of Spawn aside from Wanda, who or like the angels who are antagonists.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So anyway,
So
closing thoughts.
you know, we went in deep about, what these issues kind of, what we took away from them and what they mean. And I guess my one closing thought I want to say is, the more I think about it, the more I really dislike that F slur on that page. And I'll tell you why. It's because Spawn was being marketed towards kids and teens, and reading that word in a comic, not necessarily me, but there are kids out there who would have taken that to mean this word's in a comic. Go ahead and say it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Because I mean, certainly I was taking. We talked about swear words and coming to the process of saying those when you're in a place where you don't want to, break whatever taboo. But certainly seeing it in a comic book would have been a more inviting sort of experience for me as a kid. And I know I would have had kids who would have been like calling me that. And I just
Especially
really dislike that.
in the context of the book, if that's the first time you encounter that word, there's
Yes.
there's no context for it.
No. And there's so many, there are words that I think we've all had a word of some kind in our life, be it not necessarily a slur, of course, but some kind of word that you thought you knew what it meant, either a slang term or a real word. And you learned later, oh, that's not at all what it means. And what I've been saying is ridiculously, I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah. Mine wasn't that bad, but it was dearth.
Dearth.
Didn't know what it meant. Thought it meant wealth. It's actually the opposite.
It's the opposite.
Yeah.
So, but there you go. That's just there are words like that we learn without context that come to mean something different in our minds, and we say them. It's not a kind word.
Yeah.
It's not a kind word,
not great.
Especially in this context. And I hate to make that my final thought on this comic, but like, while we were talking about other shit, I was dwelling on it, and I just wanted to get that off my chest. And I really did not like that. Otherwise, I think it's a successfully tragic story, and
it's
it had
super
its
sad.
highs and its lows.
It's super sad. I mean, that's kind of where my final thoughts are, which is this shit sucks, but like it's supposed to.
Right.
And I don't want listeners to misunderstand me when I said earlier that like I approach this as a superhero comic and I expect some sort of like lighthearted resolution to everything that happens. It's obviously that's not the case. Like some of the greatest stories of all time, they don't have happy endings. I'm not looking for happy endings. There is something though that Todd is not it's funny because the opening scene is like when we meet Spawn, he's like doing something very technical with surgical precision, right? Todd's not a very precise storyteller. He's very blunt, and these are blunt force stories. They are blunt force emotions. They are blunt force kind of plots. They are big and broad. and they kind of whack you in the face with whatever it is, even if it's something like yeah, using a slur is that sells the big moment. It's not a good idea, but it sells the big moment. It's and I believe we've talked about it before, but it's like the Ant-Man slap, right? That's the biggest version of that moment. And Spawn comics often are, well, what's the biggest version of this story? What's the most outsized? Just the same way that this is the biggest, most outsized version of New York City at its worst.
Yes, that's what I was saying earlier. It's drawing on those stereotypes, and to get to your point about superhero stories with happy endings and like a moral and moralizing, this is a reaction to that in a lot of ways of saying, well, we're going to use these tropes and these ideas, and we're going to use these storytelling stereotypes even, but we're not going to give you the superhero ending of that. We're not going to give you the Spider-Man ending.
Right. And Spawn kind of starts and ends on that throne, and that throne is in its own way this sort of like sad and depressing monument.
I'm gonna say it again. I would love an action figure of this era of Spawn on that throne if it's done in like the colors, like in the Capullo style with the faces and the eyes are all red and shit.
Yeah, 100%. That'd be sick.
Yeah.
But yeah, excited to get into the next ones. Not really, because they're also pretty. This also is an era, I think, of like, not an era of it, but I think that a scary thing to Todd is putting children in danger. Yeah. So, because he has kids. And so we're going to see some more of that coming up soon.
Yeah, I think so.
In these next 2 issues. I think people at this point know where to find you if they want to find you. And if you want to be found. But what can you recommend to listeners this week?
Oh boy, what can I recommend to listeners this week? Trying to think what I've been into myself. I've been into some weird books lately. We talked about those. I want to recommend that everybody get outside this week. I know that's not a media recommendation.
Touch some grass.
Also, don't drop. Yeah, everybody, you know what? Honestly, that's a good recommendation. I'm taking it myself. Everybody go touch some grass this week. Take a moment, take a breather, get outside to a place of peace that you find yourself in, and take a moment not to be absorbing some kind of media or content or something. Just sit with yourself for a minute and experience that.
There you go. I will say, if you do want to consume some media, fucking rewatch Girls. It was unfairly maligned, I think, in 2012 when it came out, because there are a few things that the media hated more in 2012 than millennials and women. And it's a show that is much better than anybody realized, I think, at the time. And in rewatching it, partly because they live in Brooklyn and like I was the exact same age that they are.
I've watched like a few seasons of it. I think I started watching it sitting on David's couch in Manhattan. And
it is like, so fucking just some of the shit that they say. I'm like, I'm rewatching season 1 right now. I'm like, this writing is incredible. Also, to have like Zasha Mamet as part of the cast and just do scenes that are basically like, oh, right now we're just gonna write one of your dad's plays for a scene is so fucking funny. And it's a deft bit of storytelling, and it's funny because Adam Driver's in it. He's the worst guy, but he's such a good actor that I'm like, yeah, this guy sucks, but I'll keep watching him anyway.
Right. Well,
cool. If you want to follow the show, you can find us at Spawnography Pod or at Spawnography on Instagram, X, Blue Sky, whatever. Please rate, review, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever pod catchers that you use. It's really helpful for the show. If you want to send us an email and tell us that we're doing a great job or a bad one, you can do so at spawnographypod@gmail.com. So, George, I say to you, for Todd to love the world,
he gave his only begotten Spawn.
See you later, Hellspawn.